You're listening to a podcast from 702 and Cape Talk.
702 and Cape Talk.
The Naked Scientist.
The Naked Scientist is brought to you by The Rand Show, Joburg's biggest day out, 25 March to 3 April at the Johannesburg Expo Centre, Nasrec. All right, it's 6 after 10. This is your Friday stand-in. This is Ndumiso Ngcobo standing in for Ridi Tlhapi. And like as you heard the sting, it is now time for The Naked Scientist. And of course, Chris, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Yes, you've got a fascinating story here about bacteria that can degrade plastic.
Yep. Well, every year it's a harsh reality that millions of tons of plastic gets made, used, and then thrown away. And the problem with plastics, and the vast majority of these plastics are a chemical called PET, which is polyterephthalate. They don't break down in the environment. There's no natural process for making them degrade. So they can hang around for thousands of years. And there are literally millions of tons of plastic building up in the oceans. They break down and make microplastic particles that get into sediments, they get into marine animals, and then ultimately they can collect a cargo of chemicals from the water, concentrate them in the food chain, and that means there's a risk for us too. So scientists are on the lookout for ways that we might be able to deal with this plastic problem, both the plastics of the future, but also the legacy of the plastics of yesterday. And there's a very interesting paper, it's come out in the journal Science this week, by researchers from Japan. This is Shoshuka Yoshida, who's a researcher at the Kyoto Institute of Science. And this group went to about 250 places where there were lots of plastics, and they took samples. They took samples of mud and sludge and sediment, and they took them back to the laboratory, and they've got a very simple test. They have a thin film of PET, and they add some of the bacteria that are living naturally in these samples they've collected onto the PET, and they see if the bacteria can break it down. And out of one of the 250 samples, they isolated a bug. It's called Ideonella sacchiensis, and they found a specific strain of this bacterium which appears to be endowed with the right chemistry to eat plastic. Now, it doesn't eat a huge amount of plastic. It eats only about 0.13 milligrams per centimetre squared per day of plastic, so it's quite slow at the moment. But this is amazing. These bacteria have naturally, through some mechanism, picked up the right sorts of genes to endow them with the chemistry to start breaking down plastic. And so the researchers are saying we could use these bacteria, they're harmless environmental microbes, we could use them to begin to solve some of our plastic problem if we can optimise and evolve this chemistry that they've got so they become even better at breaking down plastics. And perhaps you could envisage in the future plastics made with some kind of bacteria sort of built into the plastic so that after a certain period of time, as the plastic ages, the bacteria are reanimated, they come to life and they start to eat the plastic. And then if the plastic is dumped in the environment, it'll just disappear harmlessly.
You know, you kind of have preempted my next question. I do have a microbiology background, so I was going to actually say to you that this is almost heresy, because when I was studying microbiology, that's one of the things that we always were taught, that there isn't anything naturally occurring microbe that could possibly break down plastic. So obviously, what has happened is with the introduction of plastic by human use over the years that we've been using plastic, is some kind of mutation has happened that has then made this possible.
Well, what they speculate is that these microbes, because none of the other members of this family of bacteria have any genes like the ones that they're using to break down the plastic, they think that these bacteria, because they found themselves in an environment where there was a lot of plastic, and they had a choice between eating something that was, say, sugar-based or in low concentration, or trying to eat the plastic, and at the same time there were other bugs there that happened to release some DNA which had the right sort of ingredients for making enzymes, these little chemical catalysts that will enable them to eat plastic. These bacteria picked up those bits of DNA in the same way as you might just install a new computer program on your computer and give your computer new abilities. It's like installing a new app. Well, that's basically what these bugs did. And in this situation, they managed to grab the right combination of genes to endow them with the ability to eat plastic.
All right, it's 10 after 10. I'm in conversation with Chris Smith, the naked scientist. We're talking matters scientific on 011-883-0702. If you're in Gauteng, 021-446-0567. If you have a question for Chris, now is your time to shine and ask those particular questions. Now, the question, obviously, Chris, is that the bacteria that you're talking about with this ability to degrade PET. So this is where this is in Japan, right? Would in terms of the scientific process, how long does one think it would take before this is obviously industrially available?
Well, they don't go into that in the paper because that really wasn't what they were looking at. They were looking at actually how do the bacteria do this, and it's unusual that they found them at all. But the bottom line is that having found this example, you now go through a process of saying, well, how do we optimize this? How do we make this work better? Can we evolve this process? And you sort of speed up the process of evolution and begin to make these enzymes that the bacteria has to break down plastic better and better and better. And also ask, do we have to use just these bacteria? Could we put those enzymes into other bacteria that are even better at doing this because they grow faster or they have other abilities as well? And so now begins a very painstaking process of optimization of this process.
12 after 10, conversation with Chris Smith, the naked scientist, on 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567. Give him a call and ask him. And we've already got Mani from Rudaport. Mani, have you got a question for Chris?
Good morning. Yes, please. I was just wondering, apart from following a healthy lifestyle, if it is worth taking antioxidant tablets in an attempt to prevent developing cancer. I've read somewhere that in one's body there's what they call free radicals that attack cells and might, cause cancer. And antioxidant tablets are supposed to minimize those free radicals in the body.
I can be cynical and I can say that is what food is for. And we have evolved over millions of years to acquire these sorts of chemicals in the right sorts of contexts and in the right sorts of concentrations by eating the right sorts of foods. We didn't evolve to derive these chemicals in brute force massive amounts from a tablet. So I would suggest that whilst in some rare cases there are some people who for certain reasons have deficiencies of certain micronutrients including antioxidants, and for them taking a vitamin pill can be life-saving, and those sorts of situations do exist, for the vast majority of us, eating a healthy diet which already contains all of these chemicals in the right trace amounts, in the right context, therefore making them get absorbed in the body in the right way and in the most bioavailable way, that's the most sensible approach. Now, there is evidence in some cases that using vitamin pills and antioxidants might in fact have the reverse effect and not lengthen your life but shorten your life. There were initially observations a number of years ago where people who were at risk of getting lung cancer because they smoked heavily were given vitamin A. Those people given the vitamin A, which is an antioxidant, had a higher rate of cancer compared with people who got a placebo pill. We don't know why. There was also a big meta-analysis by a gentleman from the University of Copenhagen. His name is Goran Bjelikovic, and he published a Cochrane collaboration review a number of years ago, and then another one a couple of years after that, where they looked at people taking antioxidant vitamins and looked at disease outcomes. And there is evidence that people who take antioxidants, including vitamin A, vitamin C and vitamin E, they may actually have a higher mortality rate compared with people who are not using these substances. And there's also evidence, which we put out on our programs in the last 6 months or so, that taking antioxidant vitamins might in fact encourage and facilitate the process of cancer spread, known as metastasis. So actually, they may not be such a good idea after all. So just eating the right foods, which means at the moment, as far as we know, 5 portions of fruit and vegetables every day, minimise your meat intake to what amounts to a healthy and happy intake of meat, and take exercise and don't drink too much and don't smoke. Those are the best ways to stay healthy.
Like my grandmother always said, sometimes all it is common sense. All right, we've got Benjamin. I was calling us from Linksfield. You've got a question for Chris?
Hi, guys. Yes, my question for Chris is, Chris, can you explain the science behind hypnosis?
Well, I can certainly try. People have subjected this to very rigorous tests, and despite what the stage performers would have you believe, and they want you to believe this because they make their money out of making you convinced that they're doing something, actually what's going on in the brain of a person who is being hypnotised is that they are being made to feel very relaxed, and they are avoiding distractions from other sources around the room, and they are therefore being made to think about things in a clear, focused way. They are not being made to do things against their will. And despite what stage performers would have you believe, you will not be able to persuade people to do the daft things that they do on stage. Those people are doing that because they are doing it out of fear they're going to be humiliated if they don't play along. I've taken part in stage hypnosis situations and watched all my friends make utter idiots of themselves and then admit afterwards to me privately that actually they were making it up as they went along, because it gave them an excuse in front of the audience to play the fool when everyone thought they were doing it because they were hypnotised. So there's no evidence whatsoever that it's anything other than a state of relaxation and mental focus.
All right, that's the answer. 17 after 10, talking to the Naked Scientist, Chris. We've got Natalie from Pretoria.
Hi, good morning. My question is a simple one. Why is it that girls can't whistle like boys? Is there any physiological reason to it?
Well, I put it to you that girls are very good at whistling, and I got my own evidence for this because Victoria, who's one of my colleagues who came out to South Africa with me last year to do the RAND show, well, the year before we were both in Australia, in Perth, doing some science shows together, and we went to an Australian rules football match, my first one to see a proper live Aussie rules football match, and myself and the lady I was there with, suddenly we were deafened by this noise originating from Victoria, who had delivered quite possibly a 10 on the Richter scale, loudest whistle I have ever heard in my entire life. So maybe it's just that boys are show-offs and they're more likely to try and make a statement, and girls have no anatomical or physiological reason why they can't whistle every bit as loudly. They just choose to be sensible about it, and they don't too often.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Let me ask you, Chris, quickly, stuttering. Okay, I have in my life never met a woman who stutters. Yet I know many men who stutter, and I tried to look this up on the internet. I couldn't find a definitive answer. Is it sex based stuttering?
To be honest, I don't know if there is a sex bias between men and women stuttering. I'd have to look that up. I don't know. I've never been asked that question. Yeah. But what I will say is I'm definitely aware of both women and men who develop stutters, and I know men and women who both have the problem. So I don't think it's exclusive to one sex at all. Whether it has a bias in one direction for one sex, I don't know.
All right, 19 after 10. Let's take a quick ad break.
702 and Cape Talk.
The Naked Scientist.
22 after 10. This is the Naked Scientist feature, and we are taking your call 011-883-0702 or 21446-0567. If you've ever thought of something that you just could not explain, one of those people is Dale from Midrand. Dale, welcome to 702 Cape Talk.
Hi.
Yeah, please ask your question.
Hi, Chris. I was wondering earlier, you mentioned that taking additional vitamins may accelerate the spread of dangerous diseases like cancer, etc. Would vigorous exercise, have a similar effect?
Well, as far as we know, exercise seems to be health beneficial. People who take regular exercise appear to have low rates of morbidity and mortality compared with people who do not exercise. This could be because people who don't take exercise eat a worse diet and also look after themselves less well otherwise, so we're not sure if it's cause or effect, or it may be that exercise in some way benefits your body through the release of other factors that reduce your risk of cancer. It may be that most of the mortality which is offset by exercise, is cardiovascular disease, because 1 in 3 people will die of that, and therefore taking exercise being good for that, you're going to see a big drop in mortality. So at the moment we don't know, but certainly there are biochemical reasons why exercise is good for you in a range of different ways, and also why eating a healthy diet is good for you in a range of different ways. So all these things summed together probably keep you healthier for longer.
Okay, but if you were diagnosed, for example, with a aggressive disease like cancer, and you exercised, would the stimulation not spread the rate of the disease? You know, if your cells are being stimulated?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know if anyone has looked. I'd have to go and see if anyone's done a study looking at people who take regular exercise after they've been given a diagnosis of cancer. I think the evidence would be that actually keeping active is very good whatever is going on in your life, whether you're healthy or unhealthy. If you maintain activity, this seems to have a positive health effect regardless. I don't think there's any reason to suspect that suddenly becoming very active or more active than normal would reduce your risk of benefiting from cancer treatment or you're making your cancer progress. I think that you're probably going to derive some benefit. But if you go over the top and you stress the system and you start taking very vigorous, excessive exercise, then this is going to be bad for you regardless of whether you've got cancer or not. So that's going to be unhealthy, full stop.
Next, we go to Mark in Centurion, who's got a question that I also am very keen to know the answer. Mark, go for it.
Yes, hi guys. Look, I exercise quite rigorously. In fact, I cycle a lot. I train every morning for about an hour, and I sweat like a pig and so on. When I come back from a ride and or exercise hard, I first weigh myself just to see whatever it is and fluids that I might have lost. I then have a bit of a recovery drink, which is about a beer glass size. It's about 500 mils with whatever that I take for recovery. But if I weigh myself straight afterwards again, theoretically, I should be 500 grams heavier because now I've ingested that 500 mils of fluid. The problem is on my scale, which goes right down in 50-gram steps, electronic scale, shows me exactly the same weight. I don't understand this. However, if I have a braai or a barbecue and I have a couple of beers in the afternoon and I weigh myself before and after, normally I see about 500 or 600 grams difference there. So why is it that straight after exercise my weight doesn't change when I drink? However, when I'm relaxed and I have a couple of beers and so on, my weight does go up. I can't actually understand what the relationship might be.
Did you say that you weigh yourself before and after you take the rehydration drink following the exercise, or you do the exercise, weigh yourself, do the exercise, have the drink and then weigh yourself?
No, let's say I come back from a ride or do the exercise, I immediately weigh myself because obviously you sweat a lot and you want to know what your weight is now, having sweated out, let's say, a litre or two of fluids. But then I do my stretching and I sit down and relax and I have my recovery drink, normally a 500 ml beer glass. As soon as I finish it and I weigh myself again, I'm still the same weight. That's totally perplexing me.
Well, it's perplexing me as well, because one would anticipate that you will have sweated a lot, because you can sweat up to 5 litres an hour if you're in a very hot, very demanding environment. And one would think that if you're having an energising bike ride, then you should be sweating quite considerably. I mean, obviously some of that sweat's going to go into your clothing, so you won't generally have lost the liquid, but then that should be reflected in what your scales are showing you. I would be sceptical of your scales, because it sounds like they might be a little bit off. I don't know how accurate they are, but there might be some intrinsic noise in the scales, and therefore perhaps the tiny subtle changes in total body fluids are not being reflected in what your scales are telling you, because they're not very accurate.
All right, 27 after 10, still taking your calls for the Naked Scientist. And next up, we've got John from the West Rand.
Hi, Chris. Chris, what I'd like to ask you, we know, for instance, that in a lightning storm, in a thunderstorm, that being in a car is possibly the safest place to be because of the Faraday effect. But now what is happening with more and more cars being made out of plastic? Are we now more exposed traveling in a car? that is not shielded by metal around you. Could you give me some idea on that?
Well, it's certainly true that people who are in a metal car are in a metal box, effectively, and as Michael Faraday showed, after whom the Faraday effect is known, that there's no net electric field inside that box, inside the metal cage, and therefore you are not at risk if high voltages are applied to you, because there are all these different routes that it can take around you, but there's no net effect across you, so there's no current flowing through you, therefore you're not harmed. Now, plastics are generally regarded as insulators, and therefore you would not derive necessarily the same benefit through being inside a plastic box. That said, most of these plastics are carbon fibre, and carbon fibres can conduct electricity, so if there was a big lightning bolt that was sufficient to melt hit the outside of the car, it would probably melt the veneer or the lacquer, and that would probably lead to some conduction through the carbon fibres, I would say. Don't know for sure. That would be my speculation. Also, there's going to be water on the outside of the car, which at the very high voltages of a lightning strike, which is millions of volts, that's sufficient to ionise or split the water particles up into ions, which will conduct electricity. So I think probably you'd still be okay, because you're still inside the plastic cocoon, which is itself an insulator, so there's still going to be very difficult for there to be any electric field across you personally. So I think you'd probably be okay, actually.
All right, Chris, on that illuminating tip, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, look forward to listening to you next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And it's only a week and a half till I shall be in Joburg. And then we're going to do some action live from 702 on the Thursday before the RAN show. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody. I hope everyone's going to come along and say hello.
All right, Chris Smith, the Naked Scientist.
Take care.
There, bye. Cheers. Big up your Easter holiday and make the RAN show your destination of choice from the 25th of March to the 3rd of April at the Johannesburg Expo Centre, Nasrec. Explore 5,000 square meters of science and tech edutainment for the whole family, gardening trends, and the man cave. Go big with the SANDF Big Bang, tons of shopping, the Animal Kingdom, and the Fun Fair. There will also be competitions and challenges, including Miss RAN Show, Extreme Bodies, South Africa's Strongest Man, and much more. The RAN Show, Johannesburg's biggest day out.